Hi, this is Paul. I wanted to just make a little YouTube today. I am going to be on vacation next week, and I don't know if I'll be making any videos. I'm going to be prioritizing time with my wife and my children next week. And so if something allows me to make a video, or if I get a thought or a comment and I just pull out my cell phone and I make a tiny little video like I've done on vacation before, maybe I will, or maybe my channel will go silent next week. I don't know yet. But so I'm going to be on vacation next week, so if you send me an email next week, they're going to pile up and they might get lost, so you might want to wait a little while before you send me an email. Anyway, there are just a bunch of really interesting videos that I've been watching, and this is a bunch of videos that aren't from Jordan Peterson, but they're from other people. Ian McGilchrist made a video with Jordan Peterson, which was very interesting, and then someone sent me this video, and I watched it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'll give you just a little taste for it, and it very much impacts the entire Jordan Peterson-Sam Harris conversation. So let me just play a little bit.
Worse. In the medical world, in the scientific world, we prize a certain kind of thinking because we believe it can discover the truth. Now, if the world only comes into being because of the way we attend to it, there can't be a single truth from which to start. And reason can't help us here. Reason is a consistency tool. That's all it is. It just means that if you start with certain premises, it can tell you what is consistent with it. What it can't tell you is whether you've started from the right premises. It can't also tell you why you're going to use reason. We have to intuit that. We can't reason to that. And indeed, the consequences of our thinking, the consequences of our reasoning aren't just bald facts. They exist in the context of persons and lives and a whole very complex animate world. And so at the end of the day, the understanding of what we have discovered by reason has to be done by calling on judgments and values and things that come from experience. So there isn't actually, it is an illusion that there is certainty. And indeed, I think many of the awful things about the world at the moment come from people who believe that they have access to a certain truth, whether that is fundamentalist religious people or fundamentalist atheists.
So the whole video is really very good, and I'll play a little bit more about genetics here towards the end. You know, I'd love to just play the whole thing and put it on YouTube, but that violates, I don't want to violate that. You can just go to Vimeo. I'll leave the link in. The whole thing is really helpful in terms of the Peterson-Harris conversation.
Breaking with hands, he can't find the duck. Well, it's a bit the same with genetics. There's just not enough information there for a start. So the same gene, PAX6, which codes for your eye, also codes for a frog's eye and a fly's eye. They're very different eyes, and the difference comes from the way the gene acts in context. And of course that's true of absolutely everything in life. It's true of poetry. When you take the meaning out of the context, it dies. Music is entirely context. Physics is in fact entirely context, because it's about the relations between particles whose existence we hardly know, we can't be certain about, and it's in the patterns, it's in the relationships, and indeed our lives are patterns and relationships, and that, as somebody commented earlier, is where meaning comes in this world. And I'd like to gloss the remark, science doesn't take away meaning. Absolutely true, but it can't give meaning either. It's neutral in that respect. When somebody has a brain insult or injury, it's not just like a component in the washing machine going AWOL. The whole vastly complex, multiply recursive system of the human mind is altered. And there are many things, as I say, that can't be, if you change the context, change profoundly their nature. Some aspects of humans, such as their limbs, are rather like parts of a machine, for the simple reason that machines were made by humans to achieve many of the tasks that human limbs hitherto fulfilled. Other than that, even a single cell is an unimaginably complex, self-regulating and self-replicating entity carrying out thousands of operations simultaneously that are complexly recursive in effect, and which communicates with and responds to millions of other cells of its own and of other kinds. We're worried about being able to model the human mind, And a distinguished scientist at UCL commented on a project where somebody was being offered money, a large sum of money, to model the human mind. And he said, well, we might do well if we could first model the nematode, which is a tiny worm. We can't do that. So we're probably not going to be able to succeed in this project. Everything in the body is not serial and mechanical. It's not like relays of messages. Everything feeds back. When you send a message out, another one comes back, as indeed from the heart, as discussed earlier. And here's Marcel Kinsborn on neurons. Marcel Kinsborn, very great Anglo-American neuroscientist. Counter to the traditional image of the brain as unidirectional information thoroughfare, when cell stations in the brain connect, the traffic is almost always bidirectional. The traffic's not in one direction with a little feedback either. Areas interact equally in both directions, directly, reciprocally, or indirectly by looping across several cell stations so that the neural traffic reverberates through its starting point. So we are not going to find it easy to model ourselves when we can hardly model such circuitry. We don't know how to predict the outcomes of such complex interactions. So there are limits to what science can tell us. It is a wonderful tool. It is a wonderful servant, but it should never become the master. And the problem is that people become very distinguished geneticists or astronomers, and they think that this means that it gives them some special gift that allows them to say whether God exists or what a human being is or what kind of a thing the world is. I'm afraid those are questions. It's no disrespect to science to say science can't answer. They're questions for philosophy. Are genes our puppet masters? Well, again, metaphors are the only way in which we understand, and science is particularly metaphorical, and it does rather matter which metaphors you use. So if you think of genes as selfish, you see one thing stand forward. If you realize that, in fact, competition is a very important part of evolution, but just as important is cooperation. You wouldn't be able to evolve without competition or without cooperation, and we couldn't function without a degree of cooperation and competition. So the model that you choose tells you very much. And I was dismayed when I saw a very distinguished Oxford biologist on television giving I think the Royal Institution lectures to children.
Anyway, the whole video is very much worth watching, and so check it out. Let's see what I can do here. Another video, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and one of my meetups members brought this one forward. Now, Neil deGrasse Tyson is an interesting guy because you can find plenty of YouTube clips where he dismisses religion, let's say. But what's fascinating about this conversation that he has with Robert Krulwich is one of the founders of Radiolabs, which is an older podcast that's done some really excellent work. And Neil deGrasse Tyson walks through basic operations of looking at dimensions and how dimensions are different. And he's a little annoying in this because he keeps calling the fourth dimensions like another dimension. The fourth dimension is time. We know that. And that's important in terms of trying to figure out reality. So something that is true in 4 dimensions is more. A lot of the thinking I've been doing lately, it gets into this question. I'm working on trying to get language about reality, because when you listen to Sam Harris talk and Matt Dillahunty, they often treat reality as if it's functionally binary. Something is real or not real. Whereas reality seems far more complex than that, and that's part of the difficulty that they're having when they talk about reality. So then when they talk about reality without a describer, then or without an adjective, then, well, that's just reality. That's like facts and Amazon boxes. But then there's metaphorical reality or metaphorical truth in some of these things. And that's just, I think, a very bad way to approach this entire conversation. It could be that we could talk about hierarchies of reality. That might be a better way to discuss what reality is. And that within hierarchies of reality, those things which colonize other realities are higher realities or stronger realities or more real. And so you get into this question of realities, it gets complicated. And in this video, Neil deGrasse Tyson goes through some basic things about dimensions: 1 dimension, 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions, the 4th dimension, which is time, and then additional dimensions. And he begins to think about the fact that mathematically we can project into other dimensions, but by virtue of how we have developed, we cannot interact with these dimensions as such. In fact, we in this moment interact fairly well with 3-dimensional space, but when you think about the relationship between consciousness and the 4th dimension, which is time, then suddenly memory gets involved. And if you go all the way back to the beginning of this video with Neil deGrasse Tyson, there are a lot of issues. I don't think he speaks well in the beginning of this. I think he speaks rather incautiously and unclearly when he talks about what is reality and personal testimony having the weaknesses that it does. But when we get into the 4th dimension, then absolutely we have to deal with time, because consciousness is always, in a sense, the now. And then memory comes in, and that helps us deal with the 4th dimension. But once you start adding further dimensions, we are simply out of our league, which brings Neil deGrasse Tyson to this conclusion.
Refrigerator door. Oh, you just derived the fundamental law of calculus. Isn't that cute? Put it up on the refrigerator. Their simplest thoughts would transcend our deepest thoughts.
This would be beings that can see more, that can see again, there's a metaphor, because would they be seeing it in the way we see it? Even whenever we use the term see, we're talking about this, we're building on a metaphor. And again, the McGilchrist video talks in some very helpful ways about how dependent we are on metaphor, as does C.S. Lewis in Miracles. But when we see this way, we're not even realizing we're using a metaphor, because what would say a being that can engage an additional dimension, like a tesseract beyond us, how would we relate to that kind of being, and how would that kind of being see us? When McGilchrist makes the point that we have as many neurons in our gut as a dog's brain has, okay? And we can't even model a worm. We don't know enough about how the nervous system of a worm behaves that we can model a worm, okay? This is how inept we are and how little we know. And so now Neil deGrasse Tyson is just talking dimensions.
And maybe to them, it is obvious what dark matter is and dark energy. Maybe to them, particles popping in and out of existence is a trivial exercise in their understanding of the multidimensional space-time continuum. And we are here groping at the sides of a wall, not knowing how tall, wide, or deep it is, because we have the limits of the human physiology evolved off the plains of Africa just to try to understand the entire universe. So I lose sleep on that question each night. So that's my...
Wait, did you almost say at the beginning of that answer that you are wondering, maybe something of a Mysterian, that you're not sure?
I'm not sure.
The universe is so complicated that it may be more complicated than we can ever fathom.
No, that's the hubristic way to say it. Oh. That's not how I said it, okay?
How did you say it again?
We might not be smart enough, okay? If you're hubristic, you would say, we are smart, but the universe is just really complicated. That's not what I said. Right. I said we might not be smart enough to figure out a universe that could be trivial to the brain of a more intelligent species. Okay. So check your hubris at the door. Otherwise, You will not bask in the cosmic perspective that so much of this discussion brings upon us. So, may I now give you my cop-out answer? My cop-out answer is, I think often about the questions we do not yet know to ask, because discoveries yet to come, but when they arrive, will put us in a new vista, a new place to stand, enabling us to see questions undreamt of and unimagined before we got there. So when I, again, lay awake at night, I ponder what kinds of questions lay beyond our reach. Because the questions that we even know how to pose, they're there. Those are not even interesting to me anymore because we knew how to ask the question. I want to know the question that is beyond everyone's reach. And by definition, I can't, because we haven't gotten there yet. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't dream of that frontier.
Now, that sounds poetic. That sounds lovely. And this is very much the style of, as one of my friends, one of the things that I'm trying to think about is, so I have these patrons, because a number of months ago, many of you said, start a Patreon account, start a Patreon account. I said, okay, I'll start a Patreon account. So I started a Patreon account, and I have patrons. And you all are sneaky, because, you know, I wasn't going to do any of this, and you said, just do it, do it. And I thought, okay, I'll do it. And a bunch of you have become my patrons. But I knew that once I had patrons, y'all would get me to keep making videos, because now I feel obliged and indebted. And so even though I've got these issues about pay for play, I want to thank my patrons, because those of you who have contributed to this channel deserve to be thanked. And so now I'm trying to think up ways that I can do things for the patrons, but I want to do that in a way that I don't create second-class citizens of the non-patrons. So I'm just trying to figure this out. And so one of the ideas I have, and leave a comment on Patreon if you're one of my patrons, I'm trying to find ways of saying thank you to my patrons. And one of the things I'm thinking about is doing commentary on videos in a rabbit room, rabb.it, where you could ask questions of a video we're watching together in real time, and I could pause the video and give commentary on it. And so actually last night with a group of people from my meetup, we kind of test drove that. And so we're still trying to figure out how it would go. So if you're interested in something like that, let me know. Leave a comment in the section. But where was I going with this? So where was I going with this? See, I lost my train of thought. So Tyson sounds romantic, and one of my meetup guys said, well, this is the religion of the physicists, and this particular individual he hasn't come out and said he's an atheist, and you know who you're talking about, and I won't dox you. He hardly ever watches my videos, although his brother does, and now everyone in my meetup will know who I'm talking about. But you know, he said, oh, this is the religion of the physicists. And this is how, when physicists get in that religious kind of mood, they say things like Neil deGrasse Tyson just said. But what's amazing here is that Tyson is opening the door to the first step in religion, which is recognizing our smallness and actually having the courage to recognize the terror that we might not be all that we imagine we are as little masters of the universe. That, in fact, there could be beings that look upon us like we look upon our dogs and cats. In fact, there could be beings that see through us more than we see through our dogs and cats, because I have a dog and right now I have a cat. I'm not going to go into that. I don't see through them as transparently as my religious tradition says other beings, not even God, other beings can see through me. Now, for a number of you, this is you're reactive to this, I know, and you're stopping the video and you're unsubscribing and you're going onto Reddit and say, stay away from Vanderklay because he just went woo-woo on us. But Tyson is going there, and what he's saying is he's coming to the realization that, not unlike Harari, that our biological limitations that are built into us bring us to a place that we will have limits to what we can understand. Now, if you go back to the, was it Ocon, the Ocon video that I made, and I had a long clip of Peterson in there with Dave Rubin and two other guys, the objectivists. Peterson talking about how we need story to take this immensely complex universe and bring it down into a small enough, a manageable enough package that we can actually interact with it. And I think there's a lot there. So that was really quite amazing from Tyson. Now, I've watched and I've listened to unbelievable Justin Brierley's stuff for years and very much enjoyed it. And he started a new effort, and Peterson and Susan Blackmore were the first on it. And he had Steven Pinker on another one. He's got Daniel Dennett coming on another one. This one he's got Tom Holland and N.T. Wright. And N.T. Wright is a hero of mine. Those of you think I have prodigious output, I am nothing like N.T. Wright. I can't keep up with as much as N.T. Wright writes. And he's got a couple of, Justin Brierley is promoting this upcoming episode that I'm very much anticipating and looking forward to now, almost as much as I was anticipating the Jordan Peterson episode. But he's got Tom Holland. Now, Tom Holland has written some really fun books on the Roman Empire, and N.T. Wright is a theological historian on that same period. And so I can't wait to hear these two talk. And Justin Brierley is teasing me mercilessly with these two teasers. And they are all over the Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, Matt Dillahunty, that whole conversation. And so if you haven't heard any of this, hear it now.
Cicero's great contemporary Caesar is, by some accounts, slaughtering 1 million Gauls and enslaving another 1 million in the cause of boosting his political career. And far from feeling in any way embarrassed about this, he's kind of promoting it. And so when he holds his triumph, people are going through the streets of Rome carrying billboards, boasting about how many people he's killed. And this is a really terrifyingly alien world. And the more you look at it, the more you realize that it is built on systematic exploitation. Mm-hmm. So the entire economy is founded on slave labor. Right. The sexual economy is founded on the absolute right of free Roman males to have sex with anyone that they want, any way that they like. Mm. And in almost every way, this is a world that is unspeakably cruel to our way of thinking. Mm. And so this worried me more and more, and it was kind of like I was thinking, well, you know, I'm clearly not, as I'd vaguely imagined, the heir of the Greeks and the Romans in any way, really. And so where am I coming from? And it was like a kind of itch, you know, you get on your back and you can't find it. And this was then enhanced for me by then writing a book about late antiquity and the emergence of Islam from the late religious the religious and imperial context of late antiquity, and again finding in Islam a profound quality of the alien. That, you know, there were aspects of Islam that were very familiar, but there were many aspects of it that again seemed deeply, deeply alien. And I began to realize that actually, in almost every way, I am Christian, and I began to realize that actually Paul, although in many ways he seems a much less familiar figure than Cicero, the kind of, you know, urbane man with his property problems. You know, Paul never had any property; he just made tents. Yes. That in almost every, you know, what is it? Seven. That is the 7 letters that are people conventionally people absolutely accept. That, you know, and as Tom Wright was saying, you know, this is not a very lengthy amount of writing, but compacted into this very, very small amount of writing.
For those of you who don't know, he's talking about letters of Paul in the Bible that are in the New Testament.
Was almost everything that explains the modern world.
Well, the Western world, as we take for granted,
Yes, but also the way that the West has then moved on to shape, concepts like international law, for instance. So the fact, concepts of human rights, all these kind of things, ultimately, they don't go back to Greek philosophers. They don't go back to Roman imperialism. They go back to Paul.
Some of the humanists
Paul really
and atheists,
his letters, I think, are, along with the four Gospels, the most influential, the most impactful, the most revolutionary writings that have emerged from the ancient world.
When you penned that article, I think it was for the New Statesman, where you said what I got wrong, and you sort of came out, as it were, and said, as far as my values and background are concerned, I am a Christian.
Yeah.
It was interesting to see the response to that, because I saw lots of atheists and humanists saying, "Oh, hang on, democracy, that goes back to the Greeks. Don't pretend that Christianity gave us everything we're grateful for." But you honestly think that actually people simply haven't appreciated just how much we owe to Judeo-Christian?
I think. If we're talking of Paul, I think of him as a kind of depth charge, deep beneath the foundations of the classical world, and it's not anything that you particularly notice if you're in Corinth or Alexandria, and then you start feeling this kind of rippling outwards, and by the time you get to the 11th century in Latin Christendom, everything has changed, and you have this. I think essentially what Paul's significance is that he sets up ripple effects of revolution throughout Western history. So the 11th century, with the Papal Revolution, essentially it establishes this idea that society has to be reborn, reconfigured, that vested interests have to be torn down. And then the Reformation, what we call the Reformation, is a further ripple effect of that, and the Enlightenment is a further ripple effect of that. And
very interesting.
Did you hear N.T. Wright? Very interesting. And I'm listening to him saying, very interesting. This is Tom Holland. He's the non-Christian in the panel. If you understand how Justin Brierley does his thing there, you got the Christian, you got the opposite, you got the non-Christian. And Tom Holland describes this as like, boom, he just set a depth charge off in my mental minions, and he just set it off in Tom Wright's mental minions, and it's like, oh, Justin Brierley, you're doing the work of your life with this thing.
It spilled out so much that now in the 21st century, we don't even realize where these ripple effects are coming from. We just take them for granted.
And so, And I'm going on vacation next week, but there's going to be, I don't know when he's coming out with this thing, but there's going to be some good stuff on this. And then he's got this other teaser dealing with Steven Pinker, who did a conversation with Jordan Peterson, and he was on this bigger expanded video unbelievable thing that Justin Brierley is. I subscribe to his channel, just 11K. So subscribe, because it's looking. Yeah, Justin, I'm promoting your channel here, baby. I like your work, but now N.T. Wright's going to talk some in this one.
I haven't actually read from cover to cover, but Steven Pinker's two books where he's saying effectively...
Well, I had him on the show quite recently.
Oh, really?
Yes,
okay. But he's saying, forget all that religion stuff. We invented the real world as it should be.
Now, when it says New Testament scholar with N.T. Wright, those of you who don't know anything about the New Testament community, N.T. Wright is a huge New Testament scholar, okay? Big deal.
Enlightenment, and all we have to do is apply that more and more rigorously, and just kick that religion stuff into touch. And it's very interesting that some commentators have said, well, if that was going to be the case, it would work in America better than anywhere else. And look at America and what's actually happening, and you'll see that it doesn't. But I think I want to respond with what Pope Benedict said 10 years ago when he was speaking at the United Nations, when he said that the whole idea of human rights is absolutely rooted in the Judeo-Christian tradition. And if you try and get the fruits of that without the roots, all you'll get is the thing will collapse into shrill special interest rhetoric, everyone claiming the status of victim and shouting,
when I had
which is exactly
well, of course, but the power of victimhood is again something that is part of the revolutionary inheritance of Christianity.
Yes.
Because that is the point of the crucifixion.
And this again gets back to my point that the Western culture war is a civil war within Christendom. It only makes sense in a group of people that have inherited the goods of Christianity. Both sides are using the fruit of this depth charge that the Apostle Paul set off in the first century, that Jesus begins with the crucifixion and resurrection, which, again, 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says, without the resurrection of Jesus, none of this makes sense.
In Caesar's world would have said, "Oh, I'm a victim, therefore I've got to be prioritized."
So Paul calls it a scandal.
But when I had Stephen Pinker in the very chair you're sitting in right now, Tom Wright, his response to this argument, which at this point was being put by Nick Spencer, who's written a very good book as well on the evolution of the West, making this very argument. His argument was, no, but, okay, Christians may have given us some good principles, but all we need to recognize is our universal humanity, that we're part of the same species, we're all sentient. That gives us every grounding we need for treating each other with dignity and human rights.
And who thought like that in the first century? I mean, Paul talking about Adam and Christ, basically.
So are you saying that kind of a belief doesn't simply emerge from a vacuum in a sense?
Yeah, the idea of universal humanness is something that actually, even in the 18th century, they struggled with. When missionaries went to America and came back arguing about whether the American Indians had souls or not. Were they really the same species as us? And then John Wesley and George Whitefield and so on saying, no, these people have to be taught to love God like any of us. And so there's stuff going on there which is, again, rooted in
and you're part of the pushback on this in a way, aren't you?
I mean, it seems to me that the single most influential phrase for understanding why we have a notion of a kind of common humanity is in Galatians, where Paul says, that there is neither Jew nor Greek.
It's like, Tom, you're supposed to be on the other, Tom Holland, you're supposed to be on the other side of this, but Tom Holland is sounding like Tom Wright, and Tom Wright is saying, yep.
Neither slave nor free, neither male nor female, and there you have this idea that we are. Of course, he goes on to say in Christ Jesus, and that for the contemporary world is. We just
that's to make people want to do without.
But of course there is an issue there, as Daniel Boyarin in a fascinated Jewish scholar writing about Paul says, so Jewishness and Greekness gets dissolved into this universal humanity. But what if I, as a Jew, want to stay a Jew? And so in a sense, there also you have the kind of the issues that continue to obsess our society, which is essentially, if you don't want to be part of a kind of universal commonality, what then do you do?
The dangerous thing, I was at a conference in America a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, based on the big book on Paul, and there was an African-American theologian, a woman at Fuller Seminary, who basically pushed back at me on this and said, the danger is that when you say we're all one in Christ Jesus, what that means is that everyone else is an honorary white male,
right.
And the white males have got it, and that everyone else has to say, okay, we're sort of part of your team, as it were. And I said, if that's what you're hearing, that's certainly absolutely not what I was intending, and it's certainly not what Paul was intending either.
For more conversations between Christians and skeptics, subscribe to The Unbelievable. There
you go, Justin. Here's Justin's. I used his video. Here's his commercial.
Sign up to The Unbelievable newsletter.
There you go. Included the commercial. So, Justin, don't take my video down. I don't think he will. So, I am going on vacation. So, my channel might be quiet, but there's some, homework that I'm giving you. And there's some videos that you can watch while I'm away. I'm sure Google will up.
Welcome to The Big Conversation here on Unbelievable with me, Justin Briley. The Big Conversation is a series of shows exploring...
Oh, that's the last time. Okay. So, this is what I get because I don't edit anything. But yeah, I'll be on vacation, and let me know about if you would be interested in doing a live room, and I would think maybe 10 participants, no more than that, because then it's just, you can't really have much of a conversation. I'm trying to figure out how to do this, and this would be a way to say thank you to the patrons. And I would probably pick a time, and it would hopefully be something that different people could connect with. And and then we would watch a video together, and we would have a good time for maybe an hour or something like that. So if you're interested in something like that, if you think that's a good idea, if you have any wisdom about how that is done well, let me know. You know, question and answer things. I see Jonathan Peugeot is doing that. Of course, Jordan Peterson has done that. I'm just following these guys. I'm not really trying to make up something totally new. But tomorrow I should have a Rough Draft to Friday video. After that, you know, maybe I'll do something on Saturday if I sneak out, because of, oh, here's the thing, because of Patreon, my wife is less hostile to my little endeavors, because for the life of my ministry, I'm always doing these little extra things, and my wife is like, well, that's not part of your job. Well, that's not part of your job. Well, does that bring any money into the house? Like, honey, don't worry about it. It's all good. So Patreon is bringing more money into the house, and so when I say, honey, I've got to make a video because I have patrons who are demanding more content from me, and I know some of you are saying, whoa, not so much. I can't do so much. So, yeah, if you've got other ideas, I'd like to thank the patrons. You know, I see all these other really good YouTubers. They have their nice, fun intro. They tell you to subscribe. They tell you to support on Patreon. And now I've got online giving for the church, and there's a little tag in there. So if you're in the United States and you want to donate and get a tax deduction, you can do that to Living Stones, because truth is, the amount I get, I have the amount I get from Patreon. I have it, keep it right up there so you can see I'm not getting filthy rich with that. The vast majority of my life is supported by Living Stones Church and my ministry. And these videos obviously do take from the time I could give to the congregation. So that's a balance. I'm always trying to do fair. I'm trying to make this a ministry of the church to all of you. So there's this 36 minutes. I guess that's not too bad.